Yes, thank you so much, Dara, for sharing the work that you're doing. We do have a few questions that came in for both you and Amy, and one of them actually relates to what you were just talking about with the obesity issue and how it's more lifestyle, or it's probably a lifestyle causation to why these pets are obese. Is there research out there that talks about causative effects of what might be causing these diseases in animals? For example, the cancer slide, which showed, how high the numbers of people are that are getting cancer versus pets. Are there causative effects that research has been done on, as well as the treatments that you've been looking into?
So I'll take the obesity. So recently there was some published data showing that there was a gene that was associated with obesity in Labrador retrievers. And although I don't want to do a bariatric, whether it be a minimally invasive or a surgical procedure in a pet, I think because we know we have these closed gene pools, it does give us an opportunity. I've been actually really interested. We know that obesity is associated with not only a higher risk of heart disease in people, but cancers. And so I have been keen on finding someone who would be willing to spend the money to do actually fat distribution screening in our pets to see, and then follow them through time and see, does it, and also do proteomics and genomics to see if it imparts a higher risk of developing either heart disease or cancer over their lifetime. And it's really a 5-minute MRI scan that would be very exciting to do. So obesity itself can be one of those causal things, as well as how we bred the dogs. I think Amy can talk about osteosarcoma and some of the, the genetics behind that. I mean, there's some very interesting things there as far as metastatic disease in pets and why it's much more metastatic in pets than it is in people. But it is interesting that, for instance, with the brain tumors, we do see it, the predilection for meningiomas versus gliomas based on sort of the head conformation. So clearly, by breeding those animals with certain conformations, we see certain diseases more frequently. And so there can be, and similarly, like bladder cancer, we see in certain breeds as well. So I'll let Amy jump in as an NCI person on the cancer end.
Yeah, I mean, I echo all of those things. I mean, I think that Elaine Ostrander's work to define the dog clades and how they all relate to each other evolutionarily, if that's a word, has been really insightful. And so like that, the glioma point, half of the dogs in that 200 dog study that was recently published in Cancer Cell, half those dogs came from 3 breeds that were all from the same clade. So there has to be some causal association with predisposition or, some sort of, error in how those dogs were just phenotypically selected, brought along with it disease susceptibility. I think one of the things that we need to do a better job of, and hopefully I think, the Broad Institute and that the hard work of all the people in genome research, we need better annotation of the canine genome to really know where a lot of these genes live. The annotation is really poor compared to mouse and human. So GWAS studies and disease association and linkage studies really would benefit quite a bit from having better annotation. So I think that's coming. It's just, we're a little bit hamstrung in that sense. I think all of us would agree there's obvious associations clinically with disease and breed. We just need better information to help back those things up.
Okay, and related to that, do you know of research in wolves? If you're talking about genomics and canine genomics, do you know if cancers exist in the wolf population? Or
I think they probably do. Yeah, I mean, I think that there are the 10,000 Genomes Project that is really the brainchild of the Broad Institute and many of their collaborators, I think will really help shed some light on, again, just annotation of non-traditional animal species. And Matthew Breen at NC State, I know, is funded to look at cancer incidence and sort of the more exotic and non-traditional companion, small mammals and birds and aquatic mammals and things like that. I mean, there are lots of examples of where cancer development in, ancient species versus more the modern breeds, those associations I think will be really valuable.
Okay, thank you. One of the other questions came in is about, can you confirm random assignment of canine patients to different treatment groups? And
Right.
if so, how?
Yeah. So the first two arms of the big osteosarcoma study were randomized. There's a backstory to why it wasn't randomized across multiple different prospective arms up front, and that's a conversation for another day. But when we do a randomized study like that, where the pet dog consents to entry into the trial, the consent form specifically says you could be randomized to standard of care or standard of care plus the adjuvant treatment. So every single dog, no matter what, gets a standard of care paid for through the funding of Moore Sample Foundation. So the first two arms of that trial that had over 300 dogs, that cost $3 million to do that work. And that was just clinical management. So the pet owner knew that they were supported through the standard of care management no matter what. And so when they came on, we had a statistician that was blinded, and we were blinded to the block size of the randomization groups. And the arms were stratified for prognostic factors. So the groups, the arms were equally weighted to make sure that we didn't have a skewed population one way or another with respect to tumor location or ALP status or geographic location. So 19 different institutes enrolled on that trial. And so that's how the randomization occurred in that context.
I think that's one of the advantages of having like a multi-center clinical trial. I know that we have an osteosarcoma trial that has randomization, and so that's already predefined. We're finding right now that as we move out of COVID-19, that there's one of our arms is easier to do than the other, and so we're going to, just for the basis of continuing the trial, we're going to relax that standard a little bit. So, but it's very hard to enroll patients that, like, normally a placebo-controlled arm is very difficult. I mean, people, if they have the choice and they could pay to do standard of care, they're not going to go through the placebo arm. So that's one of the issues that we have with our, recruiting. We don't try to recruit without offering at least some treatment. They're not going to end up in a placebo arm.
Yeah, I mean, we don't do placebo-controlled studies because we're not really looking at drug development for a veterinary licensing or product development goal. I mean, I think you have to do those studies in certain contexts if you're developing a drug for veterinary use, because the FDA CVM would have that bar to say, how do you know whether there is efficacy against, anything else? That's not my area of expertise, but generally speaking, we do a lot of the same work that Dr. Kraitchman's group does. And the thing that you do, Dara, that's way, complementary to what we do is that you're very equipment focused, and we just don't do that well. We can't necessarily deploy high-end, really intensive technological procedures like that across a 25-member consortium. We just can't do that. And so it's nice to actually see complementary efforts, because if somebody came to me and said, we really want to do this really complicated image-guided technique, I would be like, we can't do that. You really need to develop a really strong relationship with a technically expert group to do that work deeply in one location to make sure it's all done appropriately and consistently and harmonized. So it's nice to see that there are multiple different avenues to get that data that supports, the IND filings and things like that.
And I have to say that the landscape has changed in veterinary medicine. Amy's predecessor, Melissa Pelosi, I actually talked to her initially when we were thinking about doing this, and the Canine Cancer Consortium was only involving veterinary academic medical centers, and that's really why we sort of went alone on it. But now there's many private veterinary practices that are doing clinical trials or and are establishing networks. Plus, I think the veterinary specialists and a lot of the veterinary hospitals are under big corporate umbrellas. So it's changing the landscape, but there's there's definitely a lot of interest in pursuing clinical trials outside of veterinary schools now.
Yeah, and that's great. I mean, it needs to happen. We can't be a bottleneck to that progress. And so it's really nice to see just in the last few years, it's an explosion of opportunity for people who are looking for that across the US. So that's great.
Well, and this relates to one of the questions I had. Personally, I have pets, and I don't know how veterinary hospitals decide to participate in clinical trials or not, but I know even just locally around here, some of the clinics I've been to, I never see mention of it, and others promote that we work with clinical trials. We, you know, if there's an appropriate pet that might be, you know, part of a clinical trial, I guess they would connect us with whoever or whatever facility where the work would be done. Is there just like a general, is there a way you do outreach when you're looking for, you know, relationships with veterinary hospitals? Are they reaching out to you, or how do things work?
Well, I think one good thing is that the American Veterinary Medical Association has established a database. So we're sort of talking about data and open source, and they have a database of the clinical trials. And I think most clinical trials are listed on there. You know, as I said, that, you know, a lot of ours is just marketing, letting people know. But, you know, and then I was sort of looking around for my mug in my office, which says, you know, I'm a veterinarian, not Dr. Google, you know. So people do Google a lot once they find out they have this horrible disease, and they already are doing, that's sometimes the hard thing, is they've already done some treatments before you actually can trying to get a naive pet. It's not as hard as people, but.
Yeah, I mean, we work through the messaging through the veterinary schools. Everybody does it differently. Some people really have a pretty robust social media platform. So like Penn, Ohio State, those are just the ones that come to mind. They actively go out to the community and recruit, which is amazing. Some of the strategies that they have employed are really sophisticated. And so it's great to actually see every school finds its way of doing that to offer, you know, everything, that not trials that we're doing, but others that are investigator led at that school, or drug company led, or small company led. So I think it really varies depending on the school and their marketing team and PR.
Yeah, so we've done even full page ads in the Washington Post to recruit, you know, local animals. Some of them, like the GBM dogs, it's hard to have them come from far, far away. And then, you know, as I said, social media can be a fantastic platform, but mostly it's, you know, we go out and talk to our local veterinarians. And I do think it is an advantage in a vet school. You are a tertiary center. You already have some of these cases coming in anyway, and the practitioners do like to give people some other options.
Okay, well, thank you both again for your time this morning and for sharing your research. I mean, there's amazing things going on, and I really learned a lot from both of you. So thank you for your time. I don't see any other questions. Oh, wait, there might have been one that came in. We'll take a couple more minutes for questions, and then we have one special presentation, and then we'll have some lunchtime. Okay, so for Dr. Kraitchman, how can we get more information on what studies or therapies you are working on in order to refer patients? You're muted.
We do participate in the AVMA database, as well as I was told by Hopkins Radiology that we were like one of the most clicked upon parts of our radiology department for information. So it's not the most up to date, but the information is there. I have my email up for CAAT at jhmi.edu. That's another good way. Reach out or phone us. So that those are ways that you can find out about them. And we have, you know, just even some of the vendors that sell dog food and blood work and stuff like that. They love to go and just tell their clients that they go out to the personal clinics. They carry flyers so that their vets know as well. And we reach out to dog clubs as well. So.
Okay, thank you. All right, well, I think in the interest of time, we'll close out this morning session. Thanks again. And we're gonna turn the next, like I said, so we're moving into the lunch hour, which will go from now until 12:45.